Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic presented very specifically in our source, Hechisaria. Now that might make you think of witchcraft, maybe sorcery. We're looking at a YouTube video from Light Chain, El Poder de la Hechisaria, Parte 1. And it gives a really particular viewpoint we want to unpack.
That's right. And what's immediately clear is how the source sets this up around, different views within religious circles. You've got some people maybe thinking it's all just fantasy,
right,
and others seeing it as this very real, very powerful force.
Yeah.
So our aim here is to stick close to what the source actually says, navigate those views, and sort of lay out its core argument for you.
Exactly. And the source dives right in. It presents this idea of, a kingdom of God, and then this kind of flawed imitation, the kingdom of Satan.
Right.
And the main point seems to be that Hechisaria isn't just pretend. It's shown as a type of power, but one that's, let's say, illegitimate, according to this view.
And the source traces that illegitimate power right back to the rebellion of angels. Angels who rejected God's authority. And that act of defiance itself, the source points out, gets compared to witchcraft and divination in the book of Samuel.
Okay, wait, so rebellion equals witchcraft.
That's the link they make, yeah. That connection is like a key thread for them. It's not just about spells, it's about defying what they see as divine authority, seeking power or knowledge in ways that, bypass God.
Got it. And they're saying this dark power, this Hechisaria, isn't just ancient history.
Not at all. It's presented as very real, very active right through the Old and New Testaments. In their reading, it's ongoing.
Now, there's an interesting bit about, the human desire to connect with something spiritual.
Yeah, that innate longing.
Right. But the source says that can lead two ways. Towards what they call God's legitimate power, or towards this illegitimate power tied to Satan.
And that's a critical point for their whole argument. Anything supernatural, any power that doesn't come from God as they define God,
is Hechisaria.
Exactly. It all falls under that umbrella. The source is Satan's power, ultimately.
So no gray areas there. And they basically wrap up the intro saying, look, we're living in a world heavily influenced by Satan right now.
Until Jesus returns.
And that's the backdrop for understanding Hechisaria as part of this bigger spiritual conflict they see.
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly into their discussion of pagan religions in the Old Testament. The way they frame it, the nations around ancient Israel, they were involved in pagan cults. Pagan just meaning, foreign to Jewish culture and belief at the time.
And not just nature worship. The source lists specific things, right?
Oh, yeah. Idolatry, obviously, worshiping idols, but also what they call the occult arts. That includes Hechisaria, brujery, which is basically sorcery astrology.
Contacting the dead.
Mediums, right, using mediums. The whole package, according to the source.
But they do acknowledge that some people see things differently, like Halloween, or maybe Druids just respecting nature.
They touch on that, yeah. The idea that maybe the intention wasn't, explicitly evil. They mention the Celts, Druids.
But the source doesn't buy it.
Nope. They firmly state that from their biblical perspective, whatever the intention looked like, that worship was actually directed at demons. That's a really key distinction they make.
Wow. Okay. So behind the idols, behind these other gods, demons.
That's their claim. And they say it's a consistent theme in the Bible, Old and New Testaments. It creates this very clear divide. It's either their specific view of God or it's demonic.
So even if those ancient people thought they had good reasons, if the practices went against Old Testament law,
they were condemned. The intent didn't change the spiritual reality as the source sees it.
And the main goal of Hechisaria back then was?
Control. Gaining control over people's actions. Not persuasion, but direct influence through things like charms, curses.
Potions, spells.
Exactly. Which, as you can imagine, they connect directly to opposing God's gift of free will.
Right, trying to override someone's choices.
And they talk about the spiritual leaders, too. Doctors, sorcerers, gurus, magicians, shamans.
Intermediaries.
Yeah, presented as people connecting with evil spirits, fallen angels through rituals and ceremonies. A kind of hierarchy of illegitimate power.
What I found interesting was the claim about similarities across cultures. South America, Asia, Africa.
Europe, Australia. Yeah. They mentioned Paraguayan myths, links to Mayans, Aztecs, Celts, suggesting it wasn't isolated.
Implying maybe a common origin.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
Yeah.
Which leads right into their theory about the origins of this rebellion and power.
And that's where Nimrod comes in, from Genesis.
That's him, Tower of Babel story. Portrayed as powerful, yeah, but specifically opposing God. And they mention his wife, Semiramis.
A queen and a witch, they say.
That's how the source describes her. And their son, Tammuz, like a central family in this whole rebellion narrative.
Okay, and the idea is after Babel, when people scattered,
they took this pagan culture with them. Astrology, rebellion against God's authority, all spreading out.
and Semiramis and Tammuz become sort of symbolic, linked to other pagan gods everywhere.
That's how they connect it. Babylonian, Egyptian, Asian, African deities, all seen as having this occult inclination stemming from that original rebellion.
So it goes back to Satan's own rebellion first.
Right. Gaining illegitimate power then. And then they argue that humanity, born outside Eden, has this inherent rebellious carnal nature. They even cite Bible verses, Galatians 5, Revelation, condemning hexaceria and idolatry to back that up.
So it's not just outside temptation, it's something inside us too. A vulnerability.
That's the argument. This inherent rebellion makes people susceptible, more likely to seek supernatural connections outside God, chasing power, chasing knowledge.
And again, that black and white view, you're either under God's authority or Satan's. No middle ground.
Precisely. Which brings us to defining hecaceria and its tools. First thing they tackle is that whole white versus black magic idea.
Which they dismiss completely.
Totally. The source is adamant. If the power isn't from God, it's from the devil. Doesn't matter if the intention seems good, the source is what matters to them.
Okay, so their definition of hecaceria is pretty broad then.
Very broad. Practices used to get power or results. Could be stuff people want, like health, wealth, love.
Or obviously bad stuff.
Right. Curses, sickness, death, conflict, ruin, even madness covers a lot.
And the tools, you mentioned those earlier.
Yeah, a whole list. Physical things, drugs, amulets, magic candles, cards, needles, idols.
Using nature too. Plants, animals.
Mm-hmm. And animal sacrifices, blood rituals are specifically mentioned.
You highlighted the drug connection earlier. Pharmakeia.
Yes, pharmakeia. The source emphasizes that this Greek word, which we link to medicine now, was actually synonymous with hecaceria, sorcery, back in biblical times.
That's a powerful connection.
It is, in their view. They explain it as drugs being used in rituals to, open portals to a dark spiritual world, giving visions a false sense of guidance, authority, not from God.
And they had anecdotes, people meeting demons through drugs.
Yeah, personal stories reinforcing that idea of drugs as a gateway to negative spiritual encounters within their framework.
But it's not just rituals and objects. They mentioned manipulation.
Right. Manipulation and intimidation are included as key methods. They even had that sort of lighthearted but serious comment about women maybe using manipulation, men using intimidation.
Huh. The point being,
both are about controlling someone else's will, changing their choices, which again contrasts with God's gift of free will. It broadens the scope considerably.
But also there's chants.
Yeah, reading specific phrases, chants, songs, they called them conjures, also using drawing, special clothes or colors, and relying on spirit guides.
Which they identify as
demons, fallen angels, maybe posing as divine beings or even spirits of the dead.
And they were really strong on that point, trying to contact dead relatives.
Extremely strong. Condemned outright. They say it connects you to darkness, that those aren't your loved ones, but evil spirits impersonating them. A serious warning.
Okay. Then they shift to more modern stuff, music, social media.
Yeah, linking Satan, Lucifer, back to his supposed original role as the angel of music and worship.
So the idea is he now uses music illegitimately.
That's the idea, to connect with people, influence them. They mention hard rock, metal, artists openly into Satanism.
But other genres too.
Yeah, they extend it to reggaeton, romantic, even classical, suggesting artists in those fields might have occult connections. It's a very wide net.
And they had stories about cursed CDs.
Causing stress, illness in families, emphasizing music they believe is influenced by Satan or hecuceria, leading to nightmares, bad spiritual experiences.
Then the speaker got personal. Harry Potter.
Right, avoiding it because of the witchcraft themes, then feeling spiritually weak, distant from God after watching it. That sense of separation from engaging with occult content.
And that other movie, The Babysitter one?
Belle Turner, yeah, or The Babysitter.
Yeah.
Mentioning the satanic ritual in it and feeling like something evil lingered afterwards. Those personal accounts make it more concrete from their perspective.
They also mention jewelry, pendants, earrings.
Used for curses, invoking spirits, potentially. And a strong condemnation of astrology, zodiac signs, calling them diabolical.
Even medicinal herbs weren't safe.
They suggested demons could manipulate them, so any benefit might not actually be from God, questioning the source of healing.
And the consequences of any involvement are always negative.
Always, according to the source. Even if you see initial benefits, it leads to unease, nightmares, madness, illness, death, ruin, conflict. The list goes on. The devil always brings bad outcomes, is the message.
They talked about good luck charms, too, right? Things that seem harmless.
Yeah, four-leaf clovers, incense, gnomes, duendas, seemingly innocent, but potentially a negative spiritual power behind them. They shared that story about the eco-gnome in Paraguay causing problems for families.
In the shop near the bus station.
Selling healing and wealth items, but with an altar full of gnomes, interpreted as deliberately calling on a non-divine spirit for results.
There was that personal story from Bulgaria, too.
Entering a room dedicated to old Bulgarian gods, and that immediate feeling of fear, intimidation, idolatry, especially a child sensing it. Very vivid.
All leading back to that idea.
Yep.
Rebellion and Hegesaria are twins.
Exactly. Back to 1 Samuel 15.23, rebellion like divination, stubbornness like idolatry, same root, rejecting God's authority.
First example is King Manasseh.
Right. Brought back Baal worship, God's anger, spiritual adultery. The idea is defying God starts a spiritual battle. Manasseh's defeat and death presented as consequences, and he led people to astrology, worshiping stars instead of seeking God.
So trying to know the future outside God is basically trusting the devil.
That's how they put it. A lack of trust in God's power. And they call out Christians who might do this, maybe weak faith, maybe impatience, contrasting God's power, which isn't manipulable, with Satan's, which they see as easier to tap into, but ultimately destructive.
They also mention false prophets, having power.
Yeah, showing signs, just like true prophets, highlighting the need for discernment. Where's the power really coming from? Malign or good? They acknowledge non-believers might accept these things, others dismiss them, mention trabajos in Paraguay, spiritual works for love or harm.
And even if you don't believe at first, researching paganism.
And seeing perceived successes could lead you to think, hey, this stuff works. And if you're not connected to God, that belief itself maintains a link to the malign power. In their view.
Okay, second example, King Saul.
His disobedience with the Amalekites didn't destroy everything like commanded, spared livestock.
Partial obedience.
Which led to God withdrawing and Saul then seeking the medium of Endor, a direct line. Rebellion leads to occultism. Even though Saul knew it was wrong, he'd persecuted mediums before.
So desperation doesn't justify it.
Not in this view. Seeking help outside God, whether it was really Samuel or a demon, was a result of his disobedience. The lesson, if God's left you, no other power brings real victory. The devil's a bad payer, destroys his followers. God wins in the end.
The speaker mentioned their own past curiosity.
Yeah, about occultism, but realizing Satan's power is never stronger than God's. That spiritual clash when someone with God meets demonic influence, and surprise at people believing Satan's promises of power, distracting them from eternal life.
And the idea that occultists hope for power after death.
The source counters that, citing the biblical second death, final destruction for Satan and his followers.
Third example, Balaam, Numbers 22.
A complicated figure, called a prophet of Israel but also acted like a sorcerer. The king of Moab tries to hire him to curse Israel.
Showing that spiritual warfare behind earthly conflicts idea again.
Exactly. They even bring up Aleister Crowley's alleged rituals during WWII influencing Hitler.
Yeah.
And the angel Gabriel fighting the Prince of Persia and Daniel. Balaam's conflict was God saying don't go, but Satan tempting him with money.
Representing Christians trying to serve God in their own will.
Yeah, equating that to idolatry, leading to illegitimate power. They said more on Balaam comes in part 2 about today's impact, but emphasized his paradox, claiming God, acting pagan. Even after blessing Israel, he advised using women to make Israel sin, leading to their defeat.
And Joshua eventually killed him.
Under God's command, yes. For trying to serve two masters, undermining God's people, linked to lukewarmness, and modern things like lies, gossip, asymmetric warfare.
Okay, then the confrontation of the two kingdoms. Moses and the Egyptian magicians.
Right. Showing Satan has power, they copied the staff to snake trick. But God's power is superior. Aaron's snake ate theirs.
And the source says their magic wasn't fake.
No, done with the devil's power, but limited by God. They couldn't replicate the plague of lice, had to admit it was the finger of God.
Those magicians Janus Jambres mentioned in Timothy too.
Yes, linked to evil spirits opposing truth. And a prophecy that similar things happen in the end times in Revelation.
Which makes discerning spirits crucial.
Absolutely, because both sides can look miraculous. The speaker relies on God to reveal the source.
Final Old Testament showdown. Elijah versus the prophets of Baal.
Mount Carmel, the challenge. call down fire on a soaked altar.
Why did the Baal prophets even agree? Did they think they could win?
The source suggests they probably did. They knew their rituals, had likely seen some power from their god, evil spirits in this view. Cites Job being hit by fire from heaven, Satan's doing, and the Antichrist doing similar signs in Revelation, so it wasn't beyond possibility in their minds.
But they failed. Elijah's short prayer worked.
Miraculously. But then the aftermath. Elijah kills the false prophets and Jezebel rises.
A figure of witchcraft and sorcery, leading Israel astray.
Politically, spiritually, yeah. But then the twist. Elijah, fresh off this huge victory, runs scared into the desert after Jezebel threatens him.
Why? Why would he be so intimidated?
The source offers possibilities. James calls Elijah a man subject to passions, maybe a human weakness Jezebel's spirit of intimidation exploited.
Or maybe just the sheer force of spiritual intimidation.
That's the other perspective offered. Either way, it highlights intimidation, control, manipulation as key tools of hechisaria.
Which leads to the consequences again, no matter the motive.
Love, revenge, healing, money, doesn't matter. Resorting to hechisaria connects you to the malign, brings negative results.
Like broken relationships, health problems.
Marital issues, infertility, insomnia, nightmares, illness, financial ruin, accidents, death, suicide, madness, supernatural disturbances. The works. Good intentions don't justify it. It's condemned by God in this view.
Like Lucifer appearing as an angel of light.
Exactly. False front, malign power underneath. Engaging with Satan's kingdom leads to downfall, spiritually and physically.
But there's hope.
Absolutely. The power of Jesus Christ to rebuke and overcome all works of hechisaria, curses, spells. The cross isn't just forgiveness, it's where the curse fell on Jesus, bringing blessing to believers.
And Jesus reclaimed authority.
Snatched it back, yeah. Authority over earth that Satan took from Adam and Eve. So through Jesus' name, believers have authority, power over the spiritual realm, can claim victory.
Okay, that brings us towards the end of this part. Shifting gears a bit, talking directly to our listeners.
Right. Considering all this from the source, for Christian listeners especially, though it applies broadly from this perspective, there's a really strong call to live a holy life, avoid lukewarmness. That's seen as essential for fighting evil. Prayer, fasting, separating from sin, vital tools.
And a warning about trying to be friends with the world while fighting the malign.
Yeah, the source says that just leads to harm. You need clear separation, commitment.
And next time, part 2.
We'll dive into how the source sees hechisaria operating today. In families, churches, the New Age movement, society. Looking at protection, understanding its influence, especially subtle stuff in the church like manipulation and intimidation.
But the ultimate message is
God's power is supreme. Trust him completely for daily victory through Jesus, and pursuing holiness is key to that. So the final thought for everyone listening, think about the influences in your own life, even things that seem harmless. Based on what we've discussed from the source today, could any of them be, maybe unknowingly, connecting you to a spiritual power outside of God as they define him? Something to reflect on.